Do you hear that? The sound of water. The river that flows in my home, the eternal city. It's suffused with the blessed wonders of the stars.
The world of Elden Ring is as vast as it is ancient, and the veil of time has obscured much of its history. What we are left with is a world of ancient empires literally collapsing in on one another, filled with cryptic hints and environmental clues of what once was. In this first video of the series, we are going to attempt to piece together the timeline of the lands between, spanning from the most ancient civilizations all the way to the modern day. Today, we will be covering an empire whose cultural fingerprint can be felt all across the lands between. The Carians of Lucaria, the Golden Order of Leyndell, and the Eternal Cities of the Underground. Once these three cultures were all one and the same, and the observation of the stars was synonymous with the worship of the Greater Will. This ancient empire's rise and fall shaped the modern era. The missing link was laying just under our feet this whole time.
Pestilence and plague into your house, into your bed, into your streams, into your streets, into your drink, into your bread, upon your cattle, on your sheep, upon your oxen, in your field, into your dreams, into your state, until you break, until you hear. I send the sword, I send the sword, thus saith the Lord.
The fingers have willed it so.
This topic will be split into two videos, just as the history of the Nox is. There's the story of an ancient empire, which spanned the entire continent and gave rise to the most prominent cultures in the lands between, but whose story is now only told through abandoned cathedrals, statues, and cryptic descriptions. And there is the story of the modern Nox, who reside in the underground within their eternal cities, awaiting the age of the stars. These two periods are split by a cataclysm. The Nox betrayed the Greater Will and were subsequently banished under the earth, an event which almost certainly coincides with the arrival of the alien Estelles, living stars which haunt the underground after the destruction of the nameless eternal city under Leyndell. And so we reach our first discovery. The fact that the Nox's attack against the Greater Will and its vessels, evidenced by the Fingerslayer blade, is described as a betrayal, implies that the civilization they once were a part of was aligned with the Fingers. The Fingerslayer blade itself is said to have been born of a corpse, and mirrors the design of the sacred relic greatsword, which itself is the corpse of Radagon. So, by this logic, the Fingerslayer blade was likewise born of the corpse of a god. In this world, a god is defined as a vessel, or potential vessel, for the Elden Ring. And so, from these descriptions, we can determine that the hierarchy of this ancient civilization was likely much the same as the modern-day Golden Order, an order led by a female god, a vessel for the Elden Ring, and her lord consort, an order guided by the words of the Fingers. This also explains why the modern Nox are stated to be attempting to create their own lord through their experiments with the mimic tears. Our next insight into the Nox comes from Sellia, the town of sorcery. Gowry reveals an often overlooked insight with us after we help him by giving an unalloyed gold needle to Millicent.
You've been a saint through and through. As thanks, I vow to impart to you my knowledge of the lost sorceries of the Carians, descendants of the Eternal.
This is further evidenced by the Nox swordstress and monk within Sellia, as well as the empty version of the giant thrones we find within the underground Eternal Cities. This might seem somewhat unimportant at first, until we connect Sellia to another character, primeval sorcerer Lusat, whose staff we acquire after defeating the pair of Nox in Sellia, and who sorceress Selen explains.
Master Lusat is another founding glintstone sorcerer. After his expulsion from the academy, I heard that Master Lusat returned to his home, a place called Celia in the eastern Caelid wilds.
This is a huge detail because Lusat is not just any mage, he is one of the founders of the practice of glintstone sorcery itself. The eldest primeval sorcery said to have been discovered by an ancient astrologer, thought to be the founding glintstone sorcery. The glimpse of the primeval current that the astrologer saw became real, and the star's amber rained down upon the land. Lusat was an astrologer, became one of the first glintstone sorcerers, and is a descendant of the Eternal City. This is truly wild to consider, because this seemingly inconspicuous detail connects everything. Let me explain. Traveling to Liurnia, specifically to the Church of Vows, we meet Muriel. He tells us of a ritual which was once performed in this ancient building.
Radagon once cleansed himself with celestial dew, repented his territorial aggressions, and swore his love to Renala. The order of the Erdtree and the fate of the moon were conjoined, and all the wounds of war forgiven. This miracle blesses the Church to this day.
What's most interesting about this miracle is that it was performed at the statue of a Nox Night Maiden and uses celestial dew, which is a hidden tear found in the Eternal City, also known as a night tear. Once upon a time, the stars of the night sky guided fate, and this is a recollection of those times. It is notable that both Radagon and Renala understood and respected the significance of a ritual of the Eternal City. We will return to this church soon enough. It is also important to note other cultural similarities between the Carians and the Nox. First of all, the practice of turning humans into puppets is exclusively practiced by Celibus, a Carian preceptor, and Pydia, a Carian servant. The sole exception to this rule can be found within the Eternal City, an old puppet crafted in the Eternal City. These sisters, members of a cold-blooded race who wield flowing weapons, became puppets of their own volition. Additionally, Celibus uses starlight shards to craft the potions used to create these puppets, which are described as a prized item that was once used in the Eternal City as an ingredient in intoxicating draughts. These shards are also closely linked to fate, which is probably how they are used to create puppets at all. Aside from these direct textual links, there is also a wide range of cultural similarities between these two groups. The most obvious being the study of the stars. The Nox went so far as to create a false night sky underground, such was the importance of the stars to their culture. The Carians are also a matriarchal society led by Queen Renala, just as the Nox are, with the Night Maidens holding the highest clerical rank. Finally, Renala uses the larval tears for rebirth, which is the core of a creature of mimicry known as a silver tear, as much a substance as it is a living organism. This material is required by the amber egg cradled by Renala, Queen of the Full Moon, to birth people anew. It should be clear from these commonalities that the Carians and the Nox trace their lineages back to the same civilization, and that this civilization either included, or was comprised of, the ancient astrologers. So, with that established, and before we get ahead of ourselves, let's dig deeper into characterizing this ancient empire. What structures and ruins can we attribute to them, and when did the fall of this civilization occur? How does this link to Queen Marika and the Golden Order? To answer these questions, we must first return to the Church of Vows. Based on the central Nox statue, this church will be our first addition to the list of potential ancient empire ruins. The architectural style of this building is extremely unique and is only found in one other place in the Lands Between, and another within the Shadowlands. In the ruins of the grand cathedrals of Manus Celis and Manus Matir, which translate to the Church of the Hand and the Church of the Mother, respectively. And damn are these buildings important. While there is no descriptions which explain their purpose, we can extrapolate their importance simply based on their locations and names. Manus Celis is located on the Moon View Plateau, the only location in the world where a second moon can be observed. The only way to reach this ethereal location is, of course, through the underground, up through the same type of well we use to reach the Eternal Cities. Based on this location's importance to Ranni's questline, I have always believed this second moon was her dark moon, but there are other possibilities to account for. It could also be the second moon encountered by Rennala and her sister, R'hllana. Finally, there is the Moon of Nokstella, depicted a talisman of the same name. This legendary talisman is the treasure of Nokstella, the Eternal City. This talisman represents the lost Black Moon. The Moon of Nokstella was a guide to countless stars. This moon is also the source of the memory stones found in the Sorcerer's Rises throughout the world, which likewise increase your attunement slots. A black, lightly beguiling stone, prized by the sorcerers who produced them, said to be a fragment of the Black Moon that once hung above the Eternal City. I propose this moon is all three. Ranni uses the Dark Moon to bring about the Age of Stars, and the Nox are said to be awaiting the Age of Stars. So it would make sense that these two moons are one and the same, lost to time with the fall of the Nox, only to be rediscovered by the Carians. This interpretation certainly is more refined than trying to account for 4 separate moons in the game. Returning to Manus Celis and the Moonview ruins, the name of this cathedral is also extremely important. Manus Celis, which translated from Latin, means celestial hand. This church also houses Ranni's 2 fingers, making the name's meaning quite literal. Again, we reaffirm that this ancient empire worshipped the 2 fingers, and by extension, the Greater Will. Its twin cathedral makes this even more clear. Manus Meteor is quite literally built atop the finger ruins of the mother of all 2 fingers, and shares her name. The people who built these 2 ancient cathedrals were obviously aware of the deepest secrets of the world. It is no wonder why Count Ymir, a sorcerer who has seen beyond the division of stars and gods, takes up residence in the ruins of a civilization which embodied the same principle. The Church of Vows, Manus Celis, and Manus Meteor are all remnants of this ancient civilization. How can we determine what else is? Taking a closer look at all 3 of these structures, we can observe many of this one specific statue. In the Church of Vows, it is depicted holding a torch, but in the other cathedrals, this figure instead carries a sword. You may recognize him as the Saint if you are a fan of Tarnished Archaeologist, but in my circles we refer to him as Elden Charlie. Once you start looking, you will find a multitude of structures adorned with this statue. Most prominently, they can be found on the Divine Bridges, leading to the even older Divine Towers, but he can also be found alongside other discarded statues in the basement of Stormvale Castle, on the bridges surrounding Leyndell, and most interestingly, within the Eternal City of Nokstella, standing guard over an elevator which takes you to the Lake of Rot. To drive home their connection to the Eternal Cities, the walking mausoleums which have Eternal City architecture, a fact which is most clear when observing the mausoleum roaming the nameless Eternal City, also contain this statue within. Returning to the Divine Bridges specifically, it is also relevant that the largest of these bridges is the only connection to the mountaintops of the Giants, and to the consecrated snowfield, both of which are deeply connected to the story of the Astrologers and the Nox. While all of the Divine Bridges are impressive, this one really cements how powerful this empire must have been. This central lift building alone is larger than some villages. Just to really cement this connection between the Divine Bridges and the Carians, in addition to Elden Charlie, some of these bridges also contain this statue, which holds an open book. This statue also adorns the Carian study hall, which itself is the only connection to the Divine Bridge of Liurnia. The way these cultures overlap with such consistency makes it clear this connection is intentional. These statues are one of our best indicators for where the boundaries of this empire reach to. For where Leyndell stands today, the Eternal City once existed in its place. Now, there is some overlap with this theory and Nameless Singer's Gold Road video, and with some of the Tarnished Archaeologist content. These are great creators, but I have a few key disagreements with their theories. Firstly, the idea that Leyndell and the walls that surround it were themselves built long before the Golden Order. And on this point, I strongly disagree. Firstly, this would mean that America's Golden Order in its long history essentially built nothing, and their contributions amounted to essentially painting a bunch of existing buildings gold. There's also nothing that really suggests that these structures are that old. They are clearly built to include depictions of the Erd Tree, and it takes more mental gymnastics to claim that these were somehow added later than just accepting it was built by the Golden Order. I'm happy to debate this in the comments though. On the tarnished archaeologist side of things, he makes an interesting observation in this video. The main gate of Leyndell doesn't actually lead anywhere. Instead, on the other side is just a large body of water, which really doesn't make sense. Why have a main gate that leads to nowhere? He also points out that in the story trailer, Godric's forces are attacking this gate, and doing so only really makes sense if, at this point, it was still connected to the rest of the city. Now, these are great observations. What I have issue with is his explanation. He theorized that the missing part of Leyndell was where the nameless eternal city once stood, and that its collapse is what left this chasm. This seems like a cool answer at first. It seems to fit so well, and be an excellent example of environmental storytelling. But just stop and think about this for a second. This would imply that the eternal city was above ground until well after the shattering. I hope this video has been able to convince you that the fall of the Nox happened ages before Marika's rise to godhood, let alone the shattering of the Elden Ring. This is the danger of analyzing environmental storytelling first, then making the lore fit around it. It is much easier to reason that either there used to be a bridge over this area which connected to the rest of the city, which was destroyed by Morgott to block the advance of the invading armies, or that he flooded part of the city for the same purpose. Again, no hate to either of these creators, I just believe it's good to have a healthy debate here. So, what am I proposing instead? Well, based on the evidence we have, I believe that there was once a single, centrally located eternal city, likely the same one that now exists in ruins under Leyndell, within the Deeproot depths. This was the seat of power for this empire, which we will refer to as the Eternal Empire from this point on. When Celians are described as descendants of the Eternal, I believe this means the town of Celia was also once a part of this ancient empire. The fact that Lusat was one of the founders of glintstone sorcery means that Celia is extremely old, older even than the advent of glintstone. Likewise, we can also put the town of Ordina in this category as well. Not only does it have the exact same architecture as Celia, being its sister town, it is also home to multiple black knives, which are described as scions, or descendants of the Eternal, the same way the Celians are. As it stands, these two towns have clear textual and environmental evidence relating them to the Nox. The one other example of this architectural style is found within the lowest section of Leyndell, and this and only this portion of the city is probably what was left of the collapsed Eternal City below ground. Leyndell was built around what was left of the previous empire. One only needs to look at the bridge to Leyndell, which is one of the two locations within the city that contains Elden Charlie statues, to see that this architecture looks very distinct from the walls it connects to. Leyndell was built around the ruins of these divine bridges, and integrated them into the city, just as they did the red-roofed buildings. As we previously discussed, the two cathedrals, Manus Matir and Manus Celis, were also part of the Empire, along with the Church of Vows. Through our investigation into Elden Charlie, we can also tentatively claim that the Divine Bridges, Stormvale Castle, and much of the road system across the lands between also originally existed within the Empire. This really paints the picture that the Eternal Empire truly spanned the entire continent, with Ordina marking the northmost tip of the landmass, Celia the south, and the two cathedrals to the east and west. We can learn more than just where this empire was located, however. We can also glean what its belief system was, and what other groups can be attributed to it. First of all, in contrast to the modern day, where the Golden Order worships the Greater Will and the Two Fingers, and the Carians seek guidance from the stars, the Eternal Empire viewed them as one and the same. Their cathedrals both hide a set of fingers, or, in the case of Manus Matir, the Finger Mother herself, under the main structure. Yet Manus Celis is also adorned with the stone astrolobes of the Astrologers, and is littered with shards of starlight. This is clearly a place of celestial observation and greater will worship. The Eternal Empire recognized that Matir herself was a star. Divine power and celestial power are one and the same, but that fact has been largely lost to time, known only to the most inquisitive scholars and the highest priests. This ancient civilization was an empire of astrologers, the same astrologers who at one point allied themselves with the fire giants, and who would go on to glimpse the primeval current and bring down a rain of stars, marking the origin of glintstone sorcery. The fact that the underground Eternal Cities lack any form of glintstone, despite valuing the stars so highly, indicates that the ancient empire ended before glintstone was discovered in the mountaintops, helping us to begin to build a timeline. The Astrologers are an ancient group which trace their lineage all the way back to Ra, and then through the entire period of the ancient empire, even surviving its fall, and eventually going on to discover glintstone sorcery, found the House of Caria, and established the Academy of Lucaria. Well, we've already spent time to establish the Eternal Empire's connections to the Carians. In the case of Ra, I'd like to point out that a number of statues within the ruins appear strikingly similar to the attire of the Nox, specifically the Night Maidens and their conical headpiece. We will discuss the most ancient cultures, including Ra, the Ancient Dynasty, and Farum Azula further in a future video, but for now, I will say that while these three cultures certainly predate the Ancient Empire, they do have a number of connections with it. As we know all too well, empires rise only to crumble under the march of time, but people survive. And the end of the Eternal Empire must have been spectacular indeed. Now we have reached a turning point in our story, the Betrayal. The Two Fingers are flawed envoys, unripe children born of a defective mother. Just as many characters in our story, Gideon, Enya, Ymir, and most importantly, Ranni, come to realize, any order mired by their influence will be doomed to repeat the mistakes of the past. Gideon gained true knowledge after his long exchange with the Two Fingers, discovering all had been broken long ago, and that the trembling fingers, bent with age, and the Erd Tree itself, were no exception. And so, the Nox of the Eternal Empire sought to free themselves from the control of the Fingers. They crafted armor specifically designed against their foe. Helm fashioned from a crystal-looking glass, one among the Eternal City's ritual implements. Worn by those committed to high treason, it wards off the intervention of the Greater Will and its vassal Fingers. The words of the Fingers are spelt in light, and we learn from the Iris of Grace in the DLC that this light will turn any human into our follower, essentially mind-controlling them through guidance. A puppet. With this in mind, it becomes clear how these reflective helmets prevent one from being taken control of by the Fingers. The Nox crafted a relic from the body of a god, and used this blade to strike a blow against the Greater Will's vassals. For it is stated clearly in the Nox attire, they desired the Age of the Stars, an age in which one must determine their own fate as opposed to having their path decided for them by a defective envoy. Only it was not enough. The Fingers were too powerful and commanded the stars. The Estelles rained down upon the Eternal City, destroying it and banishing the Nox to the underground. A malformed star born in the lightless void far away, it once destroyed an Eternal City and took away their sky, a falling star of ill omen. A race of astrologers, forced underground, their city in ruins, no longer able to observe the stars. This is where the story of the Nox will end for this video at least, but we will continue it in the next video of the series, which will explore the cultural, religious, and biological changes the Nox underwent after being forced into the underground. For the rest of this story, we will be focusing on the overworld and what happened to the remnants of the Eternal Empire left after its collapse. For it is important to note that while the Nox were banished and the Eternal City was leveled, likely leading to a societal collapse, many of the Eternal Empire's citizens must have survived above ground. Just as the collapse of the Roman Empire did not spell an end for all of its subjects, people would move forward, even if they lost much of the knowledge held by their former civilization. As we previously discussed, many astrologers remained above ground and went on to found glintstone sorcery. The Black Knives are described as Numen as well as descendants of the Eternal, and so we can extrapolate that the Numens were a race within this larger civilization. After the collapse, some of the Numen population returned to a more humble lifestyle, eventually coming to reside within the shaman village. This collapse would have left a power vacuum in the lands between, and I believe this is the point at which another civilization, the Hornsent, rose to power. the Hornsent built the tower in Nir Elim to create a god and claim the Elden Ring for themselves. The fact that they had to build this tower implies two things. One, that before this there was no god present in the lands between, and that the Elden Ring was lost. The Nox's betrayal must have been at least partially successful. The Fingers fell from power, reduced to finding Empyreans where they could, and hoping that one would rise to godhood and return them to power. The Fingers are likely the oldest life forms on the planet, their mother, Meteor, being the first shooting star to fall upon the lands between. They are the reason we can observe such a consistent system of gods and lords throughout the timeline. Starting with Placidusax and the ancient dragons, carried through to the Eternal Empire, and finally being brought back into power by Marika. Through this lens, Marika was essentially reviving a dead empire by establishing the Golden Order, returning the Fingers to power, and as such, she earns the moniker, Marika the Eternal. Just as the Fingers force history to repeat itself, the Nox's legacy would be carried on by another descendant of the Eternal Empire, a Carian princess, heir to the Astrologers.
I would not be controlled by that thing.
But that is a story for another time. If you enjoyed the video, consider leaving a like or subscribing as it really helps the channel. You can also become a channel member and get access to exclusive perks. And, as always, thanks for watching, and I hope to see you next time.